Well, somewhere over the Atlantic this summer, in the middle of an 11-hour flight and my inability to sleep, I found myself thinking about you all and praying for you. I don't know what it is about the liminal space of flying, but somehow it provides the perfect setting to think about life and to pray. I certainly wasn't praying for the version of you I've come to meet and now know, but it was the version of you I had not yet met. Before I ever sat across a table from any one of you, I made it a practice to pray for each of you by name, because I had been given a pictorial directory on the day I officially accepted the call to become your rector. My prayer that day in everyday sense wasn't just a prayer out of the prayer book, but rather it was a very, very specific one. That God would continue to guide and equip this parish, to equip you, to equip me, and to equip us together to become exactly what God has been calling us to become. I didn't know you when I started praying that, and I didn't know a lot about your history, your buildings, your grief, or your gifts, but I knew enough to ask God for one thing above everything else, and that was to equip us. There is an old phrase I grew up hearing, and Lisa helped me remember it this week as we both reflected on our shared Southern Baptist upbringing, and it's this: God doesn't always call the equipped, but God always equips the called. Let me say that again. God doesn't always call the equipped, but God always equips the called. That phrase gives me an entirely different entry point into the gospel reading this morning, and I suppose it may underpin these 5 small parables that Jesus tells back to back to back this morning about a seed, some yeast, buried treasure, a pearl, and a net. These are seemingly small things, sometimes hidden things. They are easy to walk past without a second look, but I think they give us much more to look at and unpack, especially when we think about our shared future together. Jesus begins with a seed, and that seed is not really an impressive one. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, Jesus says, the smallest of the seeds. For those who've never encountered one, a mustard seed isn't much larger than a grain of sand. You can hold a dozen or so in your palm and still feel like your hand is empty. Mustard isn't particularly valuable, nor was it something people cultivated on purpose in first century Palestine either. It grew wildly and aggressively, almost like a weed. Some old rabbinic teaching actually warns against planting it in a garden because once it takes root, it simply takes it over. You'll notice that Jesus doesn't reach for the seeds of a cedar of Lebanon here either, the tree that every prophet before him uses to picture a great kingdom. No, he picks the one seed most people would overlook walking through a field and says, "This is what the kingdom looks like." Not the tallest tree, but rather the smallest seed doing something no one planted it to do, becoming something more than it was intended for, until birds are nesting in its branches that were never supposed to get that big. And before any of this happens, the seed disappears into the ground, gets covered over, and for a long while there is nothing to see at all. Just dirt and whatever's buried underneath it doing something invisible in the dark. So one day, a great plant exists where one didn't before. Jesus goes on to say the same thing a different way. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed into 3 measures of flour. 3 measures is not enough for a single loaf. It is enough flour to feed 100 people or more. And all it takes to make that much flour rise is one handful of yeast worked into the dough by hand until it disappears completely, mixed into the flour so that you couldn't find it again, even if you tried. And after some time, the whole batch rises anyway, quietly overnight under the cover of darkness. Beloved, smallness was never the problem Jesus was solving in these parables. Smallness is simply the starting condition. It is not some imperfection to apologize for, but precisely the shape the kingdom takes in its first hour and in its hidden hours after that. Congregation that has walked through real loss and trauma, that has maybe watched its numbers shrink, that maybe sees slightly more empty pews before it feels anything else on Sunday, that congregation is not disqualified from what God is about to do. And it might actually be standing exactly where the mustard seed began. It might already be in the ground, beginning something none of us can see yet. I say all of this to say that something is already moving here that is bigger than any of us can see the size of yet. I didn't arrive believing that as a hope. I believe it as an observation. I have been in your rooms. I've heard your stories, and there are still plenty of stories yet to hear. There is yeast already worked into this dough, disappearing completely into the flour, whether we've noticed the rising yet or not. Jesus tells one more short parable about a man who finds treasure hidden in a field. This isn't treasure he built or imported, but treasure that was already there, buried under the ground. Somebody had walked over 100 times without noticing. I think of walking through rooms in this building that remember being fuller than they are now. And I have the audacity to believe that we may be, in fact, standing on top of our own treasure that is waiting to be found. And I've also wondered how many times we have been standing on top of treasure the whole time. We just haven't noticed it. Jesus continues, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls. This merchant isn't just some casual browser. With time spent along trade routes and harbor markets, he has made finding pearls like this his whole life's work. No doubt holding thousands of ordinary pearls up to the light, learning by long practice what made one merely good and another extraordinary. He'd have handled more disappointments than successes. And still he keeps looking because he already knows better than anyone around him exactly what he is looking for. When he finally found the one, not the many, but the one of great value, he didn't negotiate and certainly didn't wait to see if something better might turn up. He went and sold everything he had and bought it. I mean, think for a second how a pearl is actually made. It doesn't start as something beautiful. It starts as an irritant, a grain of sand, a wound, something that shouldn't be there, lodged inside a living creature with no way to remove it. And over time, sealed in the shell at the bottom of the sea, the creature responds to what it cannot get rid of by coating it, layer after translucent layer, patiently, without hurry, into something of transcendent beauty. The pearl has no mirror or no way of knowing what it is slowly becoming. No one can ever point to the exact day that the change happened. There's no ceremony or dramatic turning point. It's just seasons of quiet formation until one day a merchant who has spent his whole life learning to see rightly finally holds it up to the light and knows immediately what he has found. You, beloved, are the pearl. It isn't what gets counted on Sunday morning or what's inside a budget line. You, this gathered community of people, worn in places, faithful in no ways no one tallies, you are the pearl this merchant has been searching for all these years along all those harbors. Whatever pressure has formed you, whatever previous seasons have felt like, whatever has pressed on you, whatever those seasons have felt like, none of it was proof that you weren't valuable. It might just mean that you were unable to see yourself clearly before anyone came looking. Because the merchant ultimately finds the pearl. The pearl didn't go looking for the merchant. Your worth was never something to earn or prove. That is already settled before we did anything to deserve it. And it isn't waiting on anything that we do next. And now, knowing that you have been found, what ministry at St. Paul's will you give yourself to? I mean, isn't that the whole point of these stories? That loaf the leaven was working through was never baked only for the hands that shaped the dough. It was always going to feed more people than the one standing in the kitchen. And the pearl, once it was found, doesn't stay in the dark either. It gets set, worn, and carried into rooms it never sat in before, catching light for people who had nothing to do with the years it took to make it. Whatever is rising in us isn't only for the ones gathered here on this Sunday morning. It has always and will always be for more. Trees don't grow branches for the birds already perched in them. No, they grow for the ones still circling, looking for a place to land. So Jesus closes this whole run of parables with one final image. Every scribe trained for the kingdom of heaven is like the master of a household who brings out his storeroom treasures, both new and old. Old and new, brought out of the same storeroom by the same set of hands, neither one replacing the other. That's the kind of household I pray we become. Not a parish that erases what came before, but one where old and new treasure sit on the same table, and one where both still matter. In my first week with you all, I have thought back to that transatlantic flight many times. Praying now for the people whose faces I have seen, asking God for the same simple thing. Simply to equip us. I know now what I didn't know then of what our particular treasure looks like and what your particular pearl has endured to become what it is. And I can tell you, I mean that prayer more, not less, now that I've met you. God doesn't call the equipped, but God equips the called. That was true of you long before I arrived, and it will keep being true long after any one rector's time here is finished. But here is what I know about the kind of pastor I mean to be among you. Like the seeds that grow into shelter for birds in every season, not just the fair ones. I am here for the growing seasons and the hard ones both. Like that merchant who, having found that pearl, doesn't hedge or half commit. I have already decided that I am in fully, hopefully, wholly, and joyfully for whatever comes next. So hear this, beloved. The seed doesn't stay small. Something planted in secret is already breaking ground, and it will not ask anyone's permission to keep growing. The pearl was never lost, whatever the years have told you. It was being made in secret into exactly what it is right now, and it has already been found and claimed at full price. Our storeroom is not empty. Old and new treasure both are in there, waiting to be carried out into the light, and that is our work together. starting today. So on we go, full steam ahead, because St. Paul's best days are ahead of us. Amen.